Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the LitRPG Podcast. This is episode number 136 of the show. I'm Ramon Mejia. I'm here to bring you the latest LitRPG news, reviews, and of course author interviews. And this week I have 9 new LitRPG reviews just for you folks at home. Before we begin, I want to give a quick shout out to a recent supporter of the podcast that made a very generous donation via PayPal to us. They requested to remain anonymous, so no names, but I want to give them a big thank you for their support that they make. So thank you very much. You know who you are. And of course, a big thank you to everyone else who also supports the podcast on a monthly and even episodic basis, whether it's giving donations or just sharing the podcast and spreading the good news of the LitRPG dumb. So thank you, everybody. And of course, if you want to become a supporter of the podcast, you can find out all the ways you do so at litrpgpodcast.com/support. So there we go. But of course, in the new releases and reviews, I've got 9 new reviews for you folks at home, including Advent, Red Mage book number 1. We'll be reviewing that today, even though it'll be out on Friday, which is again when most people will watch this podcast. Also out and getting a review is going to be Couch Potato Chaos Gamebound. Also reviewing One More Last Time, a LitRPG GameLit novel, The Good Guys, book number 1. Also, Roguelock, a LitRPG adventure, The Wayfarers, book number 1. After that, it'll be Rebirth Online, a LitRPG adventure. Then it's going to be The Hall, book number 1, The Muraglen Saga. Then it's going to be Phoenix World, Beta Test Zone 5, which is again the first book in that series. Then it'll be The Arena, The Adventures of Horc, book number 2. And last but not least, it'll be The Path to Peace, Alpha World, book number 6. So another title that'll be out on Friday when most people will be watching this podcast. So there you go. But before we get into those reviews, we're going to go to LitRPG News. And in LitRPG News, we're going to begin with a couple stories. Michael Chatfield, author of the Amaryllis series and the Ten Realms series, will be doing an AMA on Facebook Live on October the 10th at 7 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. That's going to be AMAs and Ask Me Anything, which means he's just going to do a live stream. He's going to be talking to people who enjoy the books and anybody who else wants to ask some questions, and he will answer them. He will allow you to ask him anything. So I plan to show up just to tease the guy, and of course watch and listen, but also just to check out to see if he grew his beard back. I'd recently seen a photo of the guy, and he was mysteriously beardless. So I'm like, so there you go. But there you go. That's a fun thing. Go check it out if you enjoyed those series, and you can get to talk to your favorite author. We'll have the link in the show notes for his author page, where I assume that's where the Facebook Live will be happening at. Okay, in other news, we have Dakota Grout, author of the Divine Dungeon series and Completionist Chronicle series, recently put up a pre-order for the 4th book in the Divine Dungeon series called Dungeon Desolation, so we've added that to our upcoming LitRPG list. But in that same press release, he also stated that he will be running a contest to promote his new public publishing company called Mountaindale Press, which we've spoken for before in the podcast. So Dakota started his own publishing company to help other LitRPG authors and other GameLit authors get the support they needed. And of course, it's a business, but it's also a great way to get back to the community. So I really admire the guy for doing that. But this week marks the first of the stories that's actually being published. So to help promote the company, getting the many upcoming titles that Mountaindale Press is running, they're going to run a month-long contest, giving away full book sets, ebooks, t-shirts, mugs, artwork, all kinds of great fun stuff there. The rules, according to Dakota himself and the post, as verbatim it says, every Friday for the next 4 weeks, I'll post about a new GameLit or LitRPG book that was released that day by my company, and if you comment on with a screenshot of you purchasing or reading the book, or heck, even commenting with your favorite non-spoilery quote, you'll be entered to win the following. And he has a whole list of like a bunch of stuff that they're putting up for the contest. So for a full detail list of all those rules and all those prizes and for the contest, we'll have a link in the show notes for the Facebook page there. So, but you can also go to the Divine Dungeon page for that post, or to Mountain Dew Press, I'm sure, for the rules if you don't want to use our link. Okay, there you go. But on to stories that are out now that we're not reviewing yet, but these are stories that have come out this week, letting you know about them. The Arena's Call Adventures on Brand, book number 4 by Tao Wong is out. Also out is Infinite Lives Online, book number 1. Also out is Ghosts of Smoke, a LitRPG novel, as is First Level Replay, book number 1. This one actually was a surprise to me. Alternate Reality Volume 1, Part 4. This is actually a really underrated LitRPG series. This is the 4th book in this series. I was pleasantly surprised how fun and interesting it actually has a darker anti-hero-ish kind of main character. So I'm happy to see that book 4 is out as well for that one. Also out is Euphoria Online, book number 3, titled Killer Dungeon. We've actually been reviewing these books for the last couple episodes. The authors have been putting out on a fairly regular basis. I believe it's like once a month. So good schedule though. And he also has been co-releasing the audiobook versions the exact same time that the ebooks have come out, which is surprisingly difficult to get scheduled correctly. But so there you go. So good for you, Phil Tucker. And we'll looking forward to read book number 3. Also out right now is Succubus, book number 4, Gnome Place Like Home. So go check out that if you enjoy that series. I haven't read it, so I can't speak for it, but plenty of other people have said that they've enjoyed it and that it is a LitRPG series. So just letting you know, again, we don't always have read all the great LitRPG series out there, and sometimes, but we still want to promote the things that people enjoy and love in the community. So this is definitely one of those. Just a heads up, there is sexual content graphically in this particular series, so just be aware. Okay, also out is Seasoned Adventurer. So there you go. That's the end of the upcoming list. I would say the out now list of stuff that has come out this past week. Okay, on to new LitRPG audiobooks. I can already mention Killer Dungeon by Phil Tucker. Also out as an audiobook though is Anomaly Somnia Online, book number 2, narrated by the wonderful Andrea Parsonu, which I'm probably saying wrong. I think somebody gave me a meme about saying her last name correctly, but there you go, it's out. Also out is The Wayward Bard, World of Chains, book number 1, as is Life Reset, EVP, Environment versus Players. That's the second book in the Life Reset series, also called the New Era Online series. And also out is Starter Zone, The Revelations Chronicles, book number 1 by Chris Parvis. Now this one might not be everyone's cup of tea. It is technical LitRPG. We give it a score 6 out of 10 when we originally reviewed the ebook version of that, so just be aware of that when you head into it. Book 2 was definitely disappointing in the series, but book 1 had some interesting themes. So there you go. Okay, on to upcoming LitRPG. This is just where we read off all the stuff that we know that's coming out in the near future. So feel free to skip it if you want to, but there are new additions to the list. On October the 8th, it'll be Kingdom of the Dead, which is the second book in the NPC Path series. October the 12th, it'll be Dan the Destroyer, book number 3, in the Gold Girls and Glory series. Then it'll be the 6th book in the Lincoln Heart. I call it the Lincoln Heart series. It's called the Barakador series. It's called Random, The Chaos of Lincoln Heart. On October the 16th, it'll be Mechs and Violence, Infinite Lives Online, book number 2. On October the 16th, it'll be The Blades of the Borderlands, which is going to be the Pharaoh, book number 11. On October the 19th, it's going to be Siphon, A Touch of Power, book number 1. This is another book from the Mountain Dew Press, which is Dakota's publishing company again. Also out on October the 25th, it'll be Hair Today, Pawn Tomorrow. This is the second book in the Good Guys series. We're actually reviewing book number 1 on the podcast today. On October the 26th, it'll be Beginnings, Peaks of Power, book number 1 by Paul Campbell Jr. This is another book from the Mountain Dew Press. On October the 31st, Base Status Online, An Unlikely Hero LitRPG Journey. On November the 1st, it'll be Neverfall, Mark of the Hero, book number 1. On November the 2nd, it'll be the Divine Dungeon series, book number 4, Dungeon Desolation. So that's a nice cover art finally to go with that. And there actually is, again, a pre-order for it. Surprisingly enough, the pre-order for this series is actually doing better than most of the other novels that are actually out now. So that's always fun to see how popular that particular series is. On November the 8th, it'll be The Parallel, a sci-fi lit RPG, Infinite Exodus book number 2. Remember that we reviewed the first book in that series recently. On November the 18th, there'll be Guardians of the Round Table book number 3, The Single Feathered. On November the 19th, The Song of Shadow, the second book in the Bard of Barleone series, which is again from Vasily Mihenko, and a co-author, I forget her first name, Dmitrieva. Remember, Vasily is the author of The Way the Shaman series, and this is a novel set in that same game universe. On November the 20th, it'll be Island Kingdoms War, Evolution Online book number 3. December the 10th, Hero Level Up book number 2. December the 16th, Free Haven Online, Winter Dungeon in the Land book number 3. And book 2 was a surprising improvement, so actually looking forward to book number 3 at this point. Okay, there you go. That's it. On to new releases and reviews. And in new releases and review, folks, we're going to begin with Advent, Red Mage book number 1, written by Xander Boyce. And again, this is the first book that Mountaindale Press is publishing. So this is their out-of-the-gate launch as a LitRPG title. So here we go. It is 332 pages, $4.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. Here is the author's description. Drew Mikhailik was working in a top-secret facility in Washington, D.C. when the Advent began. As all electronics in the world simply ceased to work, blue screens filled with information appeared before him. Drew was given access to a mana interface and a limited number of reality-altering crystals called Xantharite. Following the instructions of his vision-impairing screens, he slotted his Xantharite and changed his fate. He gained the ability to cast spells. Now alone in the dark, he must battle through the government bunker turned dungeon in a desperate bid for survival. Escape is only the beginning, the first of this many problems in the changed world. Drew will be tasked not only to survive, but to guide the rest of humanity safely through the anarchy. It's actually a pretty decent description of what the novel is. Full disclosure, I received an advance copy for review. I purchased the novel when it became available. It's already got it for pre-order, folks, even though it's coming out on the 5th of October, when most people are going to see this. I bought it well before I got a early copy for review. This is a lit RPG apocalypse story that is heavy on the combat. There's a big emphasis for fighting and combat and action. So if you're into that, I think you're going to like this story. It does a good job of explaining what the game rules are, how they apply to the world. There's lots of neat powers and variations. Thematically, the story actually reminds me a lot of the System Apocalypse series by Ta Wang. So if you like that series, this is, again, a variation on the same themes of a lit RPG apocalypse story with themes like, gathering humanity and finding a way forward through like this monster-infested world kind of stuff. But the stories are very different. They go off in different directions. They have different powers. So they're not identical or anything, but just thematically like, oh yeah, they're kind of in the same kind of subgenre of content. The very beginning of the story, I'm going to say it's a little bit rough. It's not like badly written or anything, but you can kind of tell the author's like trying to figure out the format for the story, how the worlds work, what the powers are, how they're going to balance them, and so it's a little bit rough in some places. But once the main character and the second occurs get out of that first dungeon section, the story really finds its legs, and you can see how everything's planned out, how monsters are zone appropriate. So it's getting a familiar setup to anyone who's ever played a video game or an RPG or an MMO, that kind of stuff. And so again, once the three characters leave that first Manchin dungeon, which is a little, again, like thematically just felt off with like the monster selection in there for some reason, things again expand very well. You get to see like how big the world is, how the RPG apocalypse is affecting the larger world. You get to see a larger cast of people, and you get to see some stuff about like the behind the scenes stuff that's happening in the universe, like interdimensional galactic aspects, I'll call it. Hints about intrigue, and some very good combat throughout the entire novel. Game mechanic wise, this story has RPG game mechanics, but it also establishes very early on that the world hasn't become a video game. There are no HP or MP bars, hit points or mana point bars. People do earn levels, but no XP is ever shown. People have a set number of power slots and types that they can also have. The types of powers, I should say, are also fixed. There's a well-explained, again, power system based on different color crystals that can be looted from certain monsters. In addition to like the ones they're given, again, that's not spoilery. It's in the novel description. And again, these powers on their own can advance levels. The more they're used, they become more powerful. They can even combine with other powers to create combination powers. And so there's a lot of like good RPG progression, but it's not exactly MMO themed directly. It's still like adjacent, but there's definitely noticeable missing details, like damage notifications, things like XP notifications. Like characters get experience points. They get like this level of like, it's just not shown. That there are no hard numbers, and I'm gonna get that. A lot of authors kind of have to decide where on the balancing scale of like, oh, it's super crunchy numbery, and like, oh, how much of a hassle it is to track numbers are. So this is definitely leaning more towards, oh, less of a hassle, but you still have a lot of good mechanics there. Story-wise, again, mostly just an RPG apocalypse story that is heavily, again, focused on action. There are lots of fights with monsters, lots of different powers, different upgrades, lots of different thought processes about which powers to upgrade, and then more fights, and you repeat. And again, that's kind of what this is. Again, there's a big action emphasis for this particular story. There are some nice character development moments, and there's good world building, but again, very action oriented. So that's going to be great for some people. There we get our other story threads in here that pertain to a larger plot arc through the series, including like intergalactic organizations I mentioned before. But again, that's mostly just set up for future stories. It doesn't really play too much into this particular novel. Disappointingly, there are only minor survivalist aspects to the story, which is fine. It's from like the theme of like post-apocalyptic stories, I generally kind of like expect a certain amount of survivalist stuff of like, oh, scarce resources like food or clothing or whatever it is, and that just doesn't really exist here, which is again just a choice for the story. The amount of survivalist kind of stuff amounts to like looting vending machines and other food locations, and it seems like, oh, there seems to be plenty of food for everybody, which is just kind of surprising for an apocalypse story. But there you go. The few things that bother me. The main character is a little bit overpowered, and his powers kind of progress a little bit too quickly in comparison to the other people in the story. Like, it doesn't seem like the balance is maintained for everybody necessarily. But again, I totally get that the main character is the hero, and it just kind of seems like other people's powers were intentionally underdeveloped to make him look good. For example, there's one, this is minor spoiler, there's one character who has the ability to create walls, and I'm like, even though it seems like a very defensive kind of power, I'm like, oh no, she or he absolutely has an amazing ability. Like, if you can create structure like a wall, and you can stack walls in certain directions and grow them in any angle you want to, like, you can create fortifications in an instant or in a relatively short amount of time, and that character can actually even change the walls themselves to add or take away things like slotted holes. You can create glass in the wall. I'm like, oh, that seems like a great dungeon building or like fortification aspect of a power, and it's totally underutilized. I'm like, oh, that's intentional, because that on its own can be a very overpowered, power, and that would take away from the main character. So I get why the author does it, but I'm like, oh, it seems intentional. So I'm like, oh, that's one of the things that disappoints. I'm like, oh, don't just explore the main character's amazing powers. He has friends, he has allies. Like, let's explore those as well. That's a great way to create variety within your story. Like, oh, these are amazing powers as well. Let's see how those develop. So, but again, it's maybe something for future stories. Also, there were just a couple times where like the main character had like a tiny bit of foreknowledge before like he should have. But beyond that, no real complaints here. This is like a really well thought out, well edited kind of story. Overall, good story, hits all the right action buttons for me, gives a score of 7.5 out of 10. Very solid story. That's Advent Red Mage, book number 1, with a score of 7.5 out of 10. So there you go. Okay, on to our next review, which is going to be Couch Potato Chaos, Gamebound by Eric A. Rounds. It is 496 pages, $4.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. Here's the author's description. You know those times when you're surrounded by a squadron of bloodthirsty ninjas, your back is to the wall, you're down to your last heart container, and all hope seems lost? Well, in situations like that, it's important not to panic, to take a deep breath, and remember that even if you do shuffle off this mortal coil, by the laws of Etheria, you'll shuffle right back on it again. Meet Tasha, a couch potato with no accomplishments to her name. That all changes one fateful day when she gets sucked into the world of Etheria. Here, in this world of adventure, she can become the strong person she's always wanted to be. After rescuing her princess from ninjas, one thing leads to another, and before she knows it, she's drawn into a massive quest to save Etheria. With friends by her side, Tasha must figure out who she really is. So there we go. Okay, this is essentially a transported to a game world story that depends heavily on nostalgia, parody, and satire. Like, there's a lot of like parody and satire in this particular novel. Game mechanic wise, most heroes are going to feel very familiar with the mesh of mechanics. It pulls from older video game franchises. The game was mashed up like older games like Zelda, Mario Brothers, Final Fantasy, and D&D stuff. So you're going to see like all those like game mechanics kind of put together in the same world. The main character Tasha has a normal character sheet. She also level as she fights. However, instead of like HP or hit points, she has heart containers. There's like this. Let's see. She has heart containers and magic containers to fuel her spells. So your unique class of couch potato is also very interesting and requires her to regularly entertain herself, whether it's through videos or video games or through reading, whatever the case is, or watching movies. And it gives her bonuses and unique skill opportunities. It's kind of a very fun, overpowered class. But it's also mostly utilized for comedic purposes in the story, which I thought was a little disappointing because, again, potentially very super overpowered. Story-wise, the novel depends on gamer jokes and, again, parody references for most of its humor. And I'm going to be honest, like, the humor is probably going to be the thing that makes this really good for you or not entertaining, or whatever it is can be in between. If you get the sense of humor, great. You're probably going to really enjoy it. If it keeps entertaining you through the entire novel, you're going to like the story. Like, you generally are. But if you're like me and, like, the parody humor and satire was very, funny for a little while, but then after a while, it just, you got to run it. It stopped being as entertaining. For me, it's like I started expecting something else, like something world building, like more world building or character development, more like something interesting to keep me hooked in the story beyond those gamer references and that parody and satire. And for me, it's just like it didn't work out. Like the first 15% is like very, like I think most people are going to be entertained by the first 15-20% of the story. The setup for it is really well done. There's lots of like gamer references and jokes and parodies and stuff that I think most people are going to enjoy. But after that 50% mark, 15-20%, it's like the story, I expected it to expand beyond that. And yet throughout the entire story, like it still kind of depends very heavily on parody and satire to be entertaining. The resulting game mechanics and resulting stories, like they're very slice of life after that point. And the main character has some very funny adventures. But a lot of the storyline just feels like it meanders a bit. And it when you look at the overall important story arc, it's like, a lot of these adventures in the middle, they don't really mean anything. They can actually be skipped. And so for me, they felt like they were like a little bit of filler, just like things for the main character to do, to be funny or to like have stuff to do. And it just wasn't as entertaining as it was at the beginning for me. I'm not saying I didn't appreciate the nostalgia of this at all. Again, it's just super dependent on parody and satire. And that's its basis for humor and entertainment for me at least. And it's just after a while, that aspect just stopped being what I wanted and stop kind of being funny to a degree. Other people have read this novel and they've enjoyed it the entire way through. That's why it's getting a 6 out of 10. Like, just because it doesn't work for me in this particular instance doesn't mean it's not going to work for you. If you appreciate the nostalgia the entire way through the story, I think you'll have a really good time. But for me, after a while, I wanted more from the story, like world building, interesting storyline, more character development, like more to it than just the parody and nostalgia pulls for me. And I didn't get that, unfortunately. So it didn't work for me. And again, not badly written or anything, not even boring. It's just like, this wasn't quite stop being as good. So for me, it gets scored again 6 out of 10. Couch Potato Chaos, Gamebound. But again, I encourage you, if you enjoyed this story, and you liked it the whole way through, go give it a review. Can definitely use some love on Amazon if you enjoyed it. Remember, reviews are super important, so go give it a nice review if you enjoyed it. Okay, on to our next review, which is going to be one more last time, which is a very complicated title for me. It's One More Last Time, a LitRPG GameLit novel, The Good Guys, book number 1, and it's written by Eric. I have to zoom in here. Eric something. I can't. It's actually not legible there. So, sorry, Eric. It is 299 pages, $4.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. Here's the author's description. A ruined life, a broken heart. He thought it was the end, and his gun sat ready to make sure. But an oddball offer from his last friend comes at the literal last second. Curiosity gets the best of him, and he finds himself sucked into Incarnate, a game claiming to be a whole new life. Now, as Montana, larger-than-life tank warrior, he has one more last time to get his life right. One More Last Time is it's just about something there. Sorry, it's a description like telling it's LitRPG basically, and what LitRPG is. It is again 290 pages, $4.09, and it's available in Limited. And honestly, from the cover, I thought it was going to be a different kind of story. Like the cover is very 8-bit, but the story is not. The story isn't even. I don't believe it's really set in a video game even, but it's more like transported to a medieval fantasy world with RPG mechanics that rule it. It's a very surprisingly good slice of life, action-oriented story. I was surprised by how much I actually enjoyed it. The main character, Montana, again, is transported to a medieval fantasy world with RPG rules. He has to learn how the game stuff works along with local cultures, languages, why people are trying to stab him everywhere. The world kind of has this very interesting gritty realism that was interesting to me. And I thought there's enough world building here to make the world feel fleshed out, but without like bogging down like the story with too much lore. There's also stat and personality growth in this story with the main character. And I really personally enjoyed the themes of self-improvement and like second chances in life. The RPG game mechanics are going to be really familiar to people. It's going to be character sheets, levels, XP stats, skills, magic spells, all that good stuff. The main character increases skills and stats through use and training as well as through levels. The main character, again, has a potentially couple of overpowered characteristics, but I think they're really well balanced on this story. Like he has to work hard for all this progress, even though he kind of has like a little bit of a slight advantage or boost. But again, this was like a very entertaining slice of life read. I was never bored at any point through the entire story. There really no like lulls, or everything was very nicely paced. And this was like a really good slice of life adventure. Like there's no like big plot to set the world or anything here. It really is just like following the main character, Montana, as he's like dropped on this mountain and he has to kind of survive. And then he makes his way through the mountains, and he finds some people, and he finds some allies, and he finds people, and he kind of falls into this life of adventure. And parts of the story reminded me of Conan the Barbarian, in that not that he's a barbarian, the main character, but he like the world of like, oh, this is like gritty realism, like nothing comes easy to anybody, everybody has to work really hard, and it's really grounded in like this medieval kind of world and system where like there are different classes of people, they're rival nations vying for the same land, and magic is a rare kind of commodity in this universe, and it's looked at with suspicion. There might have also been like some characters riding around with a skull mask on at some point, which was why it reminded me of like Conan the Barbarian, but like just like kind of gritty realism of like, oh, people die all the time here in this world, and nothing comes free, nothing's easy. I kind of liked that aspect of it quite a bit more than I thought it was, just from the like comparing it to like my initial thoughts when I looked at the cover. I was like, oh no, this is much this is a little bit different than what the cover kind of implies. It's not as like 8-bit video gamey. Like this is very much transported to a gritty medieval fantasy world. So good stuff all around. Had a good time with that. I really did. It gets a score of 7.7 out of 10, and that's actually the highest score of the entire podcast. So this is the one I kind of like the most out of everything. You know, I didn't like anything else, but like this one like was surprisingly good for me. So good job. That's One More Last Time, a LitRPG GameLit novel, The Good Guys, book number 1, with the score of 7.7 out of 10. So there you go. Okay, on to our next one, which is going to be Roguelock. Red Culver is the author. So that's going to be Roguelock. This is actually a short story series that's in the Wayfarers book series by the author. Actually, book 2 is already out now. Book 3 should be out relatively soon, apparently. It is 70 pages. It is 99 cents. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. Here is the author's description. Book 1 of The Wayfarers, a series of LitRPG novellas. The year is 1984, and Alex McCloud's dad has been missing for more than half of his life. When Alex inherits a mysterious game called Wayfarer, a game that should not exist, he is drawn into a fantasy world of criminal intrigue. Accompanied by a disembodied demon, an elf who is not all she seems, Alex must chase his father's legacy while finding a way to earn gold and experience points without getting himself killed in the process. So Roguelock is inspired by old school tabletop role-playing games and heist movies. So there you go. Again, this is, I'm not sure where the cutoff is for like novella to short story. I'm just going to say it's a short story. And it starts off with this like really well done 1980s nostalgia. And then it turns into this transported to a game world RPG heist story. The game mechanics are based on like custom D&D rules. But after the initial info dump on them, and character creation sections of the story, the game mechanics honestly kind of fade into the background a little bit more, and they only really show up for like fight scenes and like save throws that the main character kind of has to make. So I actually really enjoyed the 1980s storyline more than I did the RPG fantasy one. I actually thought the world building for the 1980s world was much better, and I'd kind of hoped that the story was going to stay there more, because that was actually the world that was so fascinating. That had so much culture and rich background for the character and for the interactions with other like people in the storyline. And I was a little disappointed when it shifted to like a more of a standard fantasy RPG story, even though it's a decent heist kind of story for the novella. And I'm hoping that in book 2 and in book 3, it kind of focuses back on the 1980s world, because I think that the main character will still have his RPG powers there. And so it'll be more like a, real life 1980s RPG story, hopefully. And it's kind of implied that his powers still cross over into the normal everyday 1980s world. And I'm hoping that it goes back there at some point. But the fantasy RPG world wasn't bad or anything. It's just, it's fairly standard stuff. Like nothing was super amazing or disappointing. It was just like, it goes there. So there you go. For me, it gets a score of 7.1 out of 10. I was still entertained. I had a good time with the story. It's short. I'm hoping the second short story, the second book in the series, is better, and it does again return to that regular 1980s, which was, to me, the most developed and has the most story potential. But for now, it's going to get barely into 7.1 out of 10. And that's Roguelock, a LitRPG adventure, Wayfarers, book number 1. And I'm going to read book number 2 at some point. Okay, on to our next review. It's going to be Rebirth Online, a LitRPG adventure by Michael James Plouffe. Okay, this is 190 pages, $3.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. Here's the author's description. Sam Sullivan has spent the last year of his life paralyzed, unable to afford the state-of-the-art surgery needed to repair his spinal cord. Sam has lost all hope. When the first fully immersive virtual reality game goes live, Sam is given a second chance at life. Rebirth Online offers players action-adventure and a chance at real-world riches. If Sam can rise through the ranks and claim his kingdom, he just might be able to earn enough money to afford the surgery he so badly needs. Sam enters Rebirth Online excited to begin an adventure, but within 15 minutes of spawning in the game, he's robbed, beaten, and left for dead. He wakes to find himself in the care of Anna, a beautiful elf healer. Together they discover that he has the unbelievable special ability, one that allows him to instantly level. To use it, he must grind, literally, with the girls in his guild. The only problem, a 12-hour cooldown. As Sam's guild grows, he and Anna are joined by a beautiful female human warrior, a feisty drow assassin, and a flighty female furry. But when a run-in with a high-level player named Kincaid ends with Anna's kidnapping, Sam and his girls must pull all the punches to get their guildmate back. In the process, they uncover the secret with the potential to bring the entire game crashing down. There you go. That's the novel description. And it's mostly accurate. It's kind of accurate, I should say. But to me, this was honestly just kind of an annoying mesh of LitRPG and Harem. It is LitRPG. The main character is in an RPG game permanently. He has the unique ability to level up by having sex, and that's kind of what it is. That's where the harem-ish part comes in, and that's all this ends up really being, to be honest. I mean, again, there was that plot line of like saving one of the girls that is in his harem at some point, but it's kind of an excuse just to fight some more. After the initial character creation scene and some disappointing fights, he meets some female players, he has sex with them, they all level up, he gets some new spells, does some more fights, he repeats, and that's what this is. And unfortunately, the RPG parts of the story, while they exist, they're only surface level deep. Like, they kind of exist just to tag it as RPG, and the fights aren't particularly good. They're not bad necessarily, but they're just kind of like meh. Like, okay. The sex scenes, however, fade from like fade to black to just mildly graphic, and are usually over in a couple sentences or at most a paragraph, and that's the extent of the harem stuff as well. So overall, the novel just doesn't do either LitRPG or harem particularly well. So it kind of felt, and to me, it kind of came down to like the author not really committing to either one or both to do them particularly well. So I'm like, it just didn't work. So gets a score of 5 out of 10 for me. I know there are other reviewers who gave it much poorer scores. They're like, this harem is not good, or this, and so go check the reviews if you want to check it out. But for me, it didn't do LitRPG well. It didn't do the harem side well either. And so it's just meh. Like, not necessarily bad writing or anything. It's just like, oh, this was just not entertaining because I felt like the novel was trying to be, two different things necessarily, and it didn't do either one of them particularly well. So there you go. That's Rebirth Online, a little bit retro with the score of 5 out of 10. Okay, on to our next review, which is going to be The Hall, book number 1, the Muraglen Saga, written by Frank G. Albelo. Okay, it is 258 pages, $4.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. Here is the author's description. What trait defines you? What would you do if you had to start over? When Faust Swift is thrown into a world of monsters, quests, and mysteries, he must use his wits and returning memories to overcome adversity and grow stronger. He will meet plenty of enemies and hopefully an ally here or there. Join him as the universe throws him from realm to realm and he finds what he is truly made of. So there you go. That is... that honestly doesn't describe this stuff very much well at all. This is it. This novel, and on the whole, feels like somebody's first novel. It may or may not be, and I don't necessarily mean that in like a negative respect. It just feels like as I'm reading the story, the novel as it's progressing feels like it's finding its place, and it shifts dramatically. From like the first 10-15% to the rest of the story. Like there's like a really big like world. I think honestly, if like somebody was just writing and then like kind of decided it's going to be something else and just continued on writing in the same like Word document and then edited and published it. And as the story goes on, you can see it getting progressively better as the author finds its legs and starts world building and doing character development and kind of planning out experiences and magic systems and RPG stuff. But you can literally almost see the progress as they're going, and that's what I mean by it feels like someone's first novel. The first 10% of this honestly is just weird. It's odd, and for some people it's probably not. I mean, it's not like badly written or anything, but compared to the rest of the story, it almost doesn't connect at all. Like the first 10%, the main character just wanders around like this weird dream space where all the stuff he wishes for comes true, and he meets a girl that gives him a coin that turns into weapons, and he fights some evil squirrels, and there's no RPG system there. Like there's like none, and it's just kind of this weird odd section, and then he's just transported to this fantasy slice of life LitRPG story, and from there it's just he wanders around, he fights a lot, he eventually makes some friends and has some adventures, and that's what it turns out to be for like the majority of the story. But it's like those two sections are like they feel like they're almost two different stories in a lot of respects, because he stays for the most of the time in this like art fantasy RPG world. I'm like, oh, okay, that stuff is familiar. That stuff is definitely LitRPG. But the first 10%, I'm like, what is this? When I first read it, and I'm like, oh, okay, this is definitely creative, but it just doesn't fit with like everything else. And it like I said, that's why I describe it as like, oh, this was very you can see the progress of the story as it goes on. And again, so once it gets there, again, it's a very just slice of life. He kind of does some stuff. They're from very familiar RPG systems here with level stats and skills. But even then, like the beginning part of the slice of life adventure is a little awkward. The main character meanders a lot. And it's not really until like 70% of the story that it really feels like the author is starting to plan out what he's doing or what the main character is doing. And he finds the footing in this world. At that point, again, after 70% marking of the story, then the main character learns, and this is again slightly spoilery, so just the main character learns he can do magic. And there's actually a really well thought out cultivation like magic system that I really thought was kind of neat, and that unfolds, and there's more character development, there's more like world building. I get to actually appreciate some of the deeper parts of that particular world that are finally described there, and it's really only after that point that it feels like it's a story with like any kind of proper direction, and even the characters start getting fleshed out a little bit more. Unfortunately, it's just that the journey to that point where it starts to get pretty decent just takes a long time. Like, I don't know that many people are going to want to like go through 70% of a story just to get like to the part that's like reasonably decent. I'm not even sure most people were going to get to the first 10%. And that's unfortunate. For me, it couldn't, even though I kind of liked the last like 30% of the story, the other 70% was like, oh, that was like issues. And so for me, it gets to a 6 out of 10. I can't quite give it a good, unfortunately. There's, it is what it is. So the Hall book one in the Muraglen series gets a score of 6 out of 10. I'm probably going to read book 2 if it comes out, just to see if like, oh, the author continues in like the well-developed storytelling. This one just didn't hit it for me. Maybe you can enjoy it. Again, that's what a 6 out of 10 kind of basically means, is that it's not boring, which is a 5. It's not like meh. It's not good, unfortunately, for me at least. And so it's kind of in the middle. Some people might enjoy it, some people might not. I didn't, unfortunately, so which is why it gets a 6 out of 10 for me. But feel free to check it out. You might appreciate it more than I did. But again, for me, just didn't get to like, you're already almost done at this. I'm like, oh, okay, that's a lot of time to spend to get there. Like I said, hopefully book number 2 is kind of picks up with the same good quality at the end of book number 1. So, but that's 6 out of 10 for the Hall, book number 1 in the Muraglen Saga. Okay, on to our 7th review, which is going to be Phoenix World Beta Test Zone number 5. Again, it's the first book in that series, written by C.W. Dykes. It's going to be 306 pages. It is $3.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited, and here's the author's description. Will Smith was having a great life, a wonderful wife, 2 awesome kids, and a job he liked and a stable paycheck. That all ended one summer evening when driving back to his house after a weekend of camping. A semi-truck veered into his lane and hits his SUV, killing his entire family in a single stroke. He survived, if you can call it surviving. He only had the use of his right arm, and he could move his neck and head. He would be bedridden for the rest of his life. He ended up meeting some great people that got him into MMORPG that was about to be 100% virtual, full immersion, and for a guy who could no longer walk or do anything except lie in bed, this was the escape he needed. That's a long sentence. Okay, he meets a god, gets mind-blowing loot, forms a guild, makes friends, and then dies in real life. This is his story. Please join Will and his friends for this adventure. Okay, so even if you look at the novel description, there's some technical writing issues there, but that's kind of the big thing for this story. Like there's a lot of technical writing issues, mixed senses, awkward phrasing, generally bad grammar, formatting, punctuations, that kind of stuff. For me, this was actually bad enough that it made it very challenging to read. I did finish it, but it was something I kind of had to force myself to do. The story itself, once the main character gets into the game, isn't horrible. It really isn't. It's mostly just slice of life, adventuring, mostly fighting. Like I want to say like a good 80% of this is like combat stuff. So real emphasis on just like killing stuff. The game mechanics on there are really, like there's a lot of notifications. There are there are item notifications, skill descriptions, magic descriptions, adventuring. There's even damage notifications in the story. So the author put a lot of time and effort into like detailing all this stuff, all the RPG stuff. And that's all really detailed. But it's the writing itself, like the techno aspect of it, that's super duper challenging to get through. And again, that's probably the thing that that's going to turn most people off. The story, literally, even for me, and my brain kind of ignores a lot of the technical writing stuff. It became kind of a chore to read. The biggest culprit for me, the one that my brain for some reason just couldn't ignore, is that 90% of the story feels like it's exposition. The author, and this is especially evident in the dialogue. Like the author, for some reason, I think he hates quotation marks. So it ends up being like the main character of the story is telling you what someone says instead of actually having dialogue. And I'm going to pull up just like a small sample that I copied over, just like so you can see what that means as far as like the writing goes. So it goes, I asked where the last boss was. Albert said he suspected the giant mound in the middle was hiding the last boss. And so even there's that small bit of dialogue there, no quotation marks. It's not like Albert said, quotation marks. He suspects the giant mound in the middle is hiding the boss or something. It's Albert said he suspected the giant mound in the middle is hiding the last boss. And while that doesn't seem like it's a big deal, like for like a small selection, for me, it's just like, oh, that is definitely, that's all the dialogue. Like 99% of the dialogue in the story is written like that. So even though like there's some very long conversations, it's, oh, I said this and he said that. And it's just, maybe it's just me, but it's just one of the things like, I kind of expect like, if you're going to be doing dialogue, use quotation marks, like actually have people saying things instead of like you telling me that they're saying stuff. And for me, that was kind of the thing that made it entirely enjoyable. Like I said, other people who have read this, the reviews say, oh, they all kind of comment on the same stuff. Like, oh, this, I kind of had a good time with this, but this needs a lot of editing. Like there are definitely writing issues here. And so the score is definitely reflected on Amazon. So for me, it gets a score 4 out of 10. That's Phoenix Ruled Beta Test Zone number 5 with a score of 4 out of 10. I did not enjoy it. It kind of went beyond just meh or boring. It actually dropped into unenjoyable for me, and it gets a score of 4 out of 10. So there you go. Sorry. Okay, on to our next review. It is The Arena, The Adventures of Horc, book number 2, written by Drew Sarin. This one is 156 pages, $3.99. It's available on Kindle Limited. Here's the author's description. Never split the party. All he wanted was a bit of quiet time and some extra cash for beta testing a new game. What Arlen Gosling got was so much more when disaster strikes, trapping him in a VR game. Although he's still stuck in the MMORPG of Half-World, Horc must turn his efforts to rescuing his friends when they split the party. Even though he has to be careful not to die, Horc isn't holding back when it comes to saving his friends. As the game's AI starts acting peculiar, Horc and his party find almost everything in the game is fighting against them. Their biggest challenge awaits them in the Lone Palm Arena, where they must fight and kill their friends to save them. Is Horc up to the challenge that goes against everything he believes in? Can he save his friends before he loses himself in the game? With new friends and bigger challenges than before, Horc will do everything he can to fight and stay alive in a game that is nearly as real as the everyday life he was hoping to escape. Okay, this is a very short review. This did not work for me. It really didn't. Like, I kind of gave book number 1, like, okay, like there were issues, but overall it was an interesting story. There was an interesting premise. The main character getting trapped in the story was like interesting, even though the reason why he couldn't die in the story didn't make sense. But there was enough like, building there to make the slice of adventure like entertaining enough. Book 2 loses a lot of the positive aspects and kind of keeps most of the negative. Like the biggest issue, of course, is that it doesn't make sense why the main character can't die. Like he's literally trapped in an MMO. There's like no technical aspect or reason why he's can't, die. The worst thing that happens, he gets kicked out of his pod, and he might be trapped in like a hurricane, like don't worry, like things have fallen on him. But that's kind of like there's no reason why he can't eventually log back into the game. And so for me, like the whole entire premise of this kind of starts to fall down as like again and again and again, the main character is just magically saved, or like his friends come in and sacrifice themselves to like stop him from dying in this, in this series of adventures and fights. So it just kind of hit this meh kind of point for me. I was like, oh, okay, it wasn't exciting. So and again, because I knew the main character was never die, like there was never really any kind of excitement or threat or to the main character. So I was like, oh, okay, no matter what he did in the story, I always subconsciously recognize it's going to work out for him. It's going to magically work out for him. And that's just kind of ruined it for me, unfortunately. So even though there's like an interesting plot twist with like a rogue AI, which is mentioned in the novel description, so it's not a spoiler or anything. It's just I couldn't get into as much. So for me, it gets to score 6 out of 10. That's The Arena, The Adventures of Horc, book number 2. Again, not badly written. It kind of varies between like a meh and but for me, it'll get a 6 out of 10. Like, there are aspects of it that were still like well written. And I think the banter between the characters is still really strong. It's just that, it just wasn't exciting because I knew that the main character was never going to die. He was never really going to like have any losses or fails. I'm like, okay, that's, not as exciting, unfortunately, when there's no stakes. Okay, there we go. And on to our last review, which is going to be The Path to Peace Alpha World, book number 6, written by Daniel Schienehofen. It is 416 pages and $4.99. It is not available on Kindle Unlimited. Here's the author's description. Life in Alpha World has been a blessing for Albert, more than he had ever thought it could be, and still more than he thinks he deserves at times. With allies and friends all around him and the love of 3 beautiful, unique women, he knows that this might be the best life has to offer. But all of life has complications, and his are many and varied. A quest from the Overlord that requires he'll level as quickly as he can for the endgame, or risk losing all the happiness he has found. While that is difficult enough, more issues keep showing up. The open-ended contract by the Assassins Guild on any member of Alpha Company is testing the bonds of those who have joined. Add in the background movements of the noble houses to that list to make things even more annoying. But that is still not the end of his troubles. Not the least issue seems to be the machinations of vague, old evils that are stirring again with its own plans. With all these issues starting to bear down on Albert and the Alpha Company, he must fight to accomplish the goals he needed to keep his loves, all while dealing with his own mental issues. Welcome back to Alpha World. So there we go. That's the author description. It's pretty accurate. Full disclosure, I received an advance copy for review. I purchased the novel when it became available. It's actually in pre-order as of this recording, but it'll be out when most people see this on the 5th of October. It's an easy review. I like every single book in this particular series. I've had issues with some of the very first ones. But after that point, it's like, oh, everything's really been smooth. A lot of good emotional development for the story. And this one's really no different. This one actually feels like one of the more grindy experiences. And I actually mean XP grinding in this particular case. Because Albert and his gang need to hit a certain level, to move into like that next big quest arc in the series. This is kind of like an intermediate book. It's kind of a transition novel or a setup novel, and that a lot of it is focused on getting them to those level requirements that they need. And part of me really appreciates that the author's doing this, because he could have just been like, oh, in the next book, oh, and they said, oh, the gang level grinded the XP until they hit level 80. And it could have been like this one sentence summary, but I would have been disappointed because a lot of the story's been really grounded in showing all the small details of all the hard work that goes into leveling. If leveling actually matters in this story, and it takes a lot of effort sometimes. So I definitely appreciated that this story exists and that there are all these scenes where the main character is actually going on adventures. He's doing the XP grind. He's doing the hard work to actually gain the XP he needs to level, and showing the powers he's choosing and the progress. And I think these combat scenes, because there are so many and the main character needs to level so much, are probably, I think, among the best in the series, as weird as that sounds. And I think it's because they have to be streamlined to fit them all in. And I think that was an interesting challenge for the author, because after reading this, I kind of thought, how would I do this? I'm like, oh, I don't think I could have done this better. I really couldn't, because there is such a big XP gain that is needed. The author had to not only just show the different zones that the main character is going through, but also show unique monsters and how they're challenging in each particular instance. And each particular series of XP grind is different. They have different monsters, and each one of those monster series and quest lines have their own unique challenges that actually teach the characters different ways of fighting and different techniques and different strategies for dealing with different kinds of creatures and monsters. And I thought it was really well, each wasn't boring, even though it really could have been. It's really easy to fall into a trap having very similar monsters with just different names. And that would have been a way to do it. But the author went out of his way to make sure they were unique and that they were different and they have different exploits and different weaknesses. And the main characters weren't just automatically winning, that they had to discover them and figure out their strategies. So the fighting is probably It's really it's really efficient and really streamlined. It's again, it's not super amazing, but it's like, it was really like, I'm like, oh, this, I appreciated that the author made them very interesting. So good job. Additionally, there's also the same like good emotional development and character development the author is really well known for in all of his writing. The growth, character-wise, the one that grows the most in the particular novel is probably going to be Fluffy. And I like that this was kind of a Fluffy-oriented character growth section. I think she'd been missing out in some of the earlier stuff, even though she has some very emotional stuff in book number 5 in the series, just like everybody else. But the main character kind of overshadowed a little bit. Still, good, amazing, good stuff all around. But again, the emotional development is probably a bigger thing here. So lots of good stuff. Let me see if I missed anything in this review. Nope, that's kind of it. Again, the highlight is definitely character development in the story, a good interaction between Albert and his wives, and their polyamorous relationship. So, overall, again, this feels like a transition novel. It's still entertaining. It's not as entertaining as like some of the other novels in the series. Like I think book 5 in the series, which is the one right before this, really good. Like people cried, like they really did. Like there's like huge emotional moments in there. And I think I gave that one like a 7.8 out of 10 for me. This one, not quite as like surprising. I don't think anybody's gonna like shed tears for it, but it's still good, solid writing, good entertaining stuff. And again, I think really streamlined action stuff, so it's nice there. It gets a score of 7.3 out of 10 for me. The Path of Peace, for World book number 6, good solid storytelling, but again, it kind of a transition novel, kind of a setup novel. If you had to skip it, I don't know that you would miss like a super ton going into book 7, but again, there's nice character development, especially for Fluffy. If you like Fluffball in the series, like you're gonna want to read this just for her like arc in the story. So that's Path to Peace, Alpha World book number 6, with a score of 7.3 out of 10. So there you go. That's it. We're all done, ladies and gentlemen. That's the show. Thanks for hanging out with us. Thanks for listening. Remember, if you want to support the podcast in any way, shape, or form, you can find all the ways to do so at litrpgpodcast.com/support. Again, you can follow us also on Facebook, on Twitter, on YouTube, on Patreon, and our webpage at litrpgpodcast.com. That's where we have our reviews, all the stuff we do on the show. They're organized there. There's a whole search engine for like reviews and LitRPG stuff, so you can see all the great stuff, all the amazing stuff, and all the not so amazing stuff. If you want to look at this as well, they're all there. They're all listed. You also find the back catalog for all the podcasts, all the episodes here, and also for the LitRPG podcast and the Geek Bites, LitRPG audiobook podcast, I should say, and the Geek Bites podcast as well. So we also have some great pages for groups on Facebook who are LitRPG oriented. Again, thanks for ladies and gentlemen for hanging out with me today. I had a good time. It was really fun. I love talking to you guys. I love reading LitRPG, and I love just like discussing all the amazing things that are possible within it. So good stuff. This episode had some really good stories. Again, until we can hang out again, ladies and gentlemen, remember to go read some LitRPG. Goodbye, everybody.